Salve, benvenuti e benvenuti a Cecilia Cenciarelli e a Paola Cristalli. E devo dire che, ecco, quando finalmente ho avuto tra le mani il CHAPLIN di Peter von Bagh, ho pensato che quando Aki Kaurismäki mi ha scritto Dear Gianluca, we are orphans now, il giorno in cui Peter von Bagh se n'è andato, quando ho visto il libro e ho cominciato a sfogliarlo, ho avuto come la sensazione di essere meno orfano, perché era un libro che avevamo guardato a lungo, era un libro che faticosamente si era fatto, c'erano voluti 8 anni da quando l'associazione CHAPLIN aveva dato il suo benestare perché i Cahiers du Cinéma pubblicassero il libro di Peter von Bagh su CHAPLIN a partire dai materiali che la Cineteca stava inventariando, catalogando, studiando. E ricordo l'incontro con Claudine Paquot, che era l'anima editoriale dei Cahiers du Cinéma, dove l'accordo era stato fatto, dove Peter era molto contento, sia, come dire, era il libro che in qualche modo voleva fare, era contento di pubblicare con i Cahiers du Cinéma un testo che non fosse solo relativo al cinema finlandese, a Kaurismäki, ma che guardasse alla storia del cinema. E per Peter CHAPLIN era la storia del cinema, era l'oggetto dello studio, era l'autore che aveva accompagnato tutta la sua vita, la sua formazione, la sua passione, ed era un autore su cui era continuamente ritornato in molti momenti della sua vita professionale. Poi ci vollero 8 anni per Peter per realizzare quel libro. Nel frattempo i Cahiers du Cinéma avevano cambiato proprietà, avevano abbandonato quelle monografie che avevano per un lungo periodo editato, e quindi, come dire, era svanita la prospettiva dei Cahiers du Cinéma, ma Peter, che a quel punto era pronto, pubblicò il libro in finlandese. E quando Peter ci portava i suoi libri in finlandese eravamo colmi di gioia, perché erano sempre dei bellissimi libri anche da sfogliare, ma anche disperati perché non potevamo leggerlo. Poi siamo partiti con vari tentativi di traduzione falliti, perché Peter ha una lingua molto, molto personale, ecco, e tutti noi che abbiamo avuto la fortuna di conoscerlo, di leggerlo e di ascoltarlo, sappiamo che la lingua di Peter è parte integrante del suo discorso, e quindi è stato molto lungo ritrovare quella lingua, e Paola Cristalli ha avuto un ruolo fondamentale, anche perché Paola era negli anni, nei lunghi anni di direzione del cinema ritrovato da parte di Peter, è stata la persona che ha sempre tradotto i suoi scritti dall'inglese, e quindi, oltre a essere una persona che conosce molto bene la lingua italiana, e che quindi poi sa mettere a posto perfino una cosa che scrivo io, ecco. E finalmente il libro c'è, e
And
noi abbiamo rispettato
finally
tutto.
the book is there. We respect completely the original book, a book in which we feel the presence of Peter only by going through it rapidly. We added some extra images, something that when Chaplin worked in our archive to choose the images, well, they were not yet available, but basically it's the book that Peter has edited, has taken in charge in the original version, Finnish version, but into Italian. For us, it's a fundamental book that accompanies the work of these 20 years and that to some extent cast a light on this time. It's a personal book, and clearly this book works and is based on the work of Cecilia, as many other scholars. But it's a totally personal book, as always was the Glance by Peter. And it's a book, to my opinion, really very, very interesting. You cannot abandon it if you start it, because it's really a person-to-person relationship with Chaplin under the outlook of and look of Peter. It's an immense work. And it's rare to have a monography for each film, but Peter applies his work on each film of Chaplin, including the last one, the one that would not have been finished, The Freak. And we have published at the beginning of this year a beautiful book cared for by Cecilia Cenciarelli that would have been a book that would have been loved immensely by Peter. Often I wondered why Peter loved Chaplin so much, and I believe that the answers are quite evident. Peter loved cinema, history, and Chaplin is the only director that knew how to entertain a dialogue with history and could dialogue in such an absolute, unique and thorough way with history. And then because Peter had within himself, despite his huge culture and depth of his glance, had maintained an aspect that was childish. He had something of his childhood still in himself that allows you to look in a different way the reality and what happens under your eyes. And knowing how to represent it like a child, that is, with the capability of being deep as well as light and unique, like children may have. Who do I pass on the microphone? I will say a couple of words, even 3 words. We all will say a couple of words.
I link with what Gianluca said, or the beauty, but the difficulties of this endeavor, because we started with an important attempt in translating Peter's words that did not come to pass. Perhaps we made some difficulties, but also showing in the results we received they were not satisfying, showing the depth of Peter's language and his style. he has many hints in his language, unevocation, and so also readers must cooperate with the words written on the pages, and so it happened with the translators. After the first attempt, we found Nicolas Raynaud, a translator, and he translates the book written by Scandinavian writers. He's a translator that translated Arno Pasilinen, the Finnish literature that comes in Italy, that has come in Italy and is quite strong, very close to the Italian language. So he considered that he's been living in Helsinki for 30 years, and he knew the fame of Peter von Bagh. He also had met him several times. He was very excited about the work, so we started, but after a couple of weeks he told me, well, I've been translating from Finnish. I translated the Finnish literature at 30 years, but something so difficult, I've never found it. So just to show you that this difficulty is, and I would like, is not that the language of Peter is complicated, and so the book is hard to read. But it is with obstacles about the fact that you realize there is a trove of richness, of meaning and style that you have to come to show and come to the fore. And I said, don't worry, I feel I have a sort of a blessing by Peter, because as Gianluca said, it happens to me. I had the great joy and pleasure for years to translate his fantastic English. The thing that we have by Peter von Bagh, besides that, which is his essential book, really a great chance, an opportunity to really know one of the biggest critics of the 20th century. So the thing that we have are the things that he wrote for our Cinegrafie, our review, several notes that he wrote for the catalogs of Cinema Ritrovato down to 2013. Also his contribution to the Encyclopedia of Cinema by Einaudi that was edited by Giampiero Brunetta up to 2010, and also the notes that he wrote for the dictionary of the Treccani movies. So just to show you where you can find the writings of Peter. And these things were notes that he wrote in English, and his shiny English that he had. And so he gave me, and every time there was something that I did not grasp fully, and I would enter it, I would change it, someone to make it more readable, considering what I felt. I said, go, don't worry, it's okay, just we have to work in this way. So I felt it deeply in me, and so we really worked with Raynaud in order to work in this way, not to let any stiffness in the language. So the language is somewhat cut short, so it is just one sentence after another, in a sense. And so it's not that I'm rewriting that, and I don't want to get lost, in other words, get lost. So I tried it, and I sent half of the text to Gianluca and Cecilia and told them, please tell me your opinion, read it, and think what you feel independently and on their own. Said yes. Again, we hear Peter's voice. And so we moved on, and I do believe that we have this book, and Cecilia will tell you more about this book, because of the many books on Chaplin, this is precious and unique and should be read. And so it will be a great pleasure and also enrichment because that's important. Also with Cecilia, there was a time when we exchanged views and I needed that. And as regards what Gianluca said about the uniqueness of love by Peter on Chaplin, considering for the 20th century. And I said, yes, that's true. So this book is a great score around Chaplin. And quite crudely, it touches on two notes, I would say two specific bars or measures, there is to say, observing from head start to back in society as divided in social classes, the relationship of classes in terms of social fabric that intersperse the 20th century, and the solitude as an essential element of humans' existence and lives. I think that these are the two elements emerging very strongly in this book that really take you off, and once you start reading it, you cannot put it back. Also, our translators wrote me, and he asked me to send print copies as soon as possible, and we will send it to him, because I would like to keep it, because that Peter has made me a sort of a Charlie Chaplin. So by reading this book, you want to read all the films made by Charlie Chaplin. I repeat myself, but I think this is the best compliment that you can do to a book about cinema.
Penso che sia lì con noi già.
È qui con noi, Anna?
Sì, è qui con noi, ma non la vediamo.
Ah, se possiamo dare la parola a Anna, noi siamo felici.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, hi. Sorry for not being there. I sit in Peter's working room, hi, in the north of Finland. And I'm sorry if the connection is not good, because there apparently are still places where the 5G and 4G don't reach very well. Thank you for being invited. This book is based on a lifetime of writing of my father, lifetime of watching cinema, lifetime of loving cinema and writing. As all of you who know him know that he was extremely industrious writer who would wake up early in the morning to watch films and write about them. And he essentially started that habit already as a child, although at that time he wouldn't have a home cinema yet. But writing this book, he would go back to the notes that he had written decades ago. He would have notes written about the same films over and over and over in different times of his life, different ages, and he could read them, complete them, remember, and I think you can see this in this book, that it's kind of based on a longer period of time. As my father wrote a lot throughout his life, like he left 500,000 pages, which hadn't been published by the time he died, made him also a great kind of generalist. He would not be too concentrated on a certain area of cinema, but he would watch and enjoy and write about everything, essentially. And by his early 30s, he would already publish in Finnish a history of cinema, which was his. He tried to kind of essentially get the whole history of world cinema into one book. And in this book, of course, in the cover, there was painting of Chaplin. I've been wondering why, when Chaplin was kind of almost a symbol of cinema, the love for cinema, and was so important for him, why so late? Why would he publish this book only like 1 year before he died? In 2013, this was published in Finnish. And I think like one of the big reasons must have been that so much had been written about Chaplin, as he writes in this book. So much had been already written and said. And his take on it was to try to kind of carefully, respectfully, film by film, go through the production of Chaplin, to follow his development into an artist and director, and then combine it with the social and historical context in which he was so great. And also kind of write about Chaplin as a great social commentator of the 20th century. And a kind of important aspect of my father's writing has always been the language, the way he in a way of writing, brings this kind of larger understanding and wit and humor, and kind of how he notices things in films. He could also always bring it very accessible. And what was always important for him was that what he wrote would be accessible for people, that it would be like all kinds of people could read it. And that's what you can see in the Finnish edition. And I know for him it would have meant so much to see this being translated into Italian, to reach wider audiences, to be published in Italian, which is the language which became so important for him in his last years, and working there in Italy with you. It would have meant so much. And also the fact that the book has been published by Cineteca, by the very institution which for him was so dear. I know that Cecilia and Gianluca have been working, like helping with the writing process, but also helping a lot with the translation. With the fact that we now have the translation, it's been a long process, and I've been told that the Italian translation by Paola Cristalli is excellent. It's very good, and that edition. I know that Peter, all of you who know him, remember him, you know that he would have wanted to be here now to be at this event, and for him it would have been very important to be there in Bologna, not to be in Zoom. I assume for him all this streaming and everything would be just very secondary. If there's any way of traveling, he would be there. So from the family's part and from kind of Peter's, if I can talk with Peter's part, I want to thank you, the Cineteca, and of course the access for the archives and all the help there. And it's fantastic that this publication, that this has been published in Italian. And I miss there a lot. One can see that the festival is alive and living. Great to see you.
Grazie Anna, grazie di cuore.
Grazie.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much, Anna. You know, she makes us cry a little bit, huh? She makes us cry a little bit.
Ci manca molto Peter, secondo me.
We miss Peter a lot. We laughed a lot with him. You know, we would really enjoy his company, and it's difficult for me to summarize this work with him because it lasted for a very long time. And this release is delayed vis-à-vis the first release in Finnish. So could have proceeded. And as I was saying before, I have been a worker of this project in the best sense of this term. Maybe another book on Charlie Chaplin is not needed, but this book, yes, we need it. On my part, I was lucky to learn a lot from this process, because the archive, the Chaplin archive, like very many archives, is a very live material, full and filled with information, practical and informal, on the processes, on the workings, and it's a precious magma that has to be followed, enlightened and understood. So working with Peter at this process for me was a great lesson, because as a matter of fact, what emerges clearly from this book is that it is a very organic work, and as Paola just said, Anna said just now, it puts together the writings of very many times and many generations, like the rings of a tree. And I really feel that it was his glance, recomposed of very many years of critics. And so putting together this aspect, and along with his curiosity and a sort of fear of these archives, because he knew that we were amidst the process of opening boxes, studying and digging into all this material. So he was into this source of information, but it's clear that his vision as an intellectual was a very experienced and complete view. I was a worker. I define myself as a worker because I would supply him information, and we proceeded film by film, and per each film I would select what I thought would be the most significant pages in the archives that were more significant. And then when he would come over, we would discuss about them, and this for me and for the group, the work group around the Chaplin project, unlike Anna Fiaccarini, because the first book was on Limelight, and the whole Zegna group was a very rich work. But I wanted to say that this book comes out in a fluid way, and in the presence of the archives, without being a dominant element, and the space and the final result in the Peter found out, discovered what was the diversity of Chaplin vis-à-vis all the rest. That is, he cast a light on how Chaplin was an outsider, not only in the last year of his careers as a prey of Puritan obscurantism, McCarthyism, but since ever he was so. So this is a very important and interesting element. This morning, when we heard Thierry Fremont speaking, and when Fremont talked about with Gianluca about Tavernier, he talked about this cinephilia, that is every day watching films from childhood to death was an important thing, and Fremont he called it cinéphilie de chambre. That is, considering the capacity, the enlightened look through the very many conversations throughout the years. And this book is the mirror of this thing, this cinéphilie de chambre, because with Paola and along with her, she has given, for instance, a form, a shape to the bibliography of the book, and refer to certain quotes, and as Tremont about Tavernier said, it's not that he had invented these quotes, but he had digested them so much that he had made them his own. This was a funny aspect, but as well as eloquent, of this way of thinking and re-elaborating cinema. Now, what Cecilia just said, and very rapidly, is this. This book clearly is the result of a work that has been written and rewritten throughout the years, and it is the echo of very many critical voices, as if Peter had called along with him, as if when you call travel companions, you know, and not to lose and miss out on any element, and recreate the density, the critical density, without, however, needing to say, Jean-Paul Gattolin said that thing that day on that newspaper, not necessarily right, but this was the part of what he didn't consider to be necessary, that is, all the detailed information of the quotes. So I found myself in front, maybe I don't know the figure exactly, 150 items, and so I said, we cannot make precise references, and then I don't want to put notes below the page, because surely he doesn't want it, and the book doesn't want it. But at the same time, maybe a reader might want to that is fussy or finicky, might be disoriented. So at the very end, we have decided, with the help of Elena Correra, who helped me a lot in this research, and Gianluca De Santis helped me in the editing of the choreography. We have put together, or at least what we managed to put together the text of origin, without specifying too many notes, the pages, but knowing more or less which are these texts, without quoting. Von Bagh has assumed in his critic Olympus, made up of friends that have made up the critic organism of one century. And as Cecilia said, it's true. I really believe that this book is really unique, because I think it's a rare case where a classic critic of the 1900s of intellect and style makes a cross-matching with the archives. Here we're talking about an eminent figure that was trained and formed in other times and other instruments, that thanks to events of this life, ends up in an archive of CHAPLIN, and comes up with a book where all the material from the archive that usually burdens the books, whereas here it comes up with an incredible lightness. So we maybe didn't need another book on CHAPLIN, but in this case, yes. One of the film of the Mutual, 1 a.m., maybe you might have seen it. So CHAPLIN goes back completely drunk in his home, and there are all these objects, rebels, Kafkan style. Peter tried to find the reason for which this film took place just in that very moment, and he wondered about this many times. I want to send him a message in the bottle, because I found this answer too late, unfortunately. But it's an example on how archives work, because like the case of all the comics of the Mutual that are over 80, and it's a unique case in which he puts himself on the scene by himself, and that's why archives enlighten us. Chaplin, the film after this one, The Count, was supposed to come out after he had a terrible crisis of inspiration as it happened, and so we found letters or telegrams where it says Charlie is blocked, come immediately, he cannot advance with the film, he cannot progress with them. So this creative crisis, and there are traces of this, brought him so much close to the August of 1916, and he didn't know what to do, so he invented this assolo, and that is a sort of Kafkan nightmare. And Peter did not understand this, and The Count came out 1 month after, in September. But this is one of the many examples revealing what Chaplin said all his life, that is, cinema was not easy for him, there was a complex thing for him. Another thing that was mentioned this morning when talking about Tavernier, that what comes out is the artisan's soul comes about, you know. So this difficulty in creating cinema, and it comes up very easily. Another thing that we have said already, but I wanted to come back to it, is the fact that Peter treats all films in the same way, in the sense that he really is focused on each film, that is, whether it's a real or absolute long feature films. And also this allows to look at Chaplin in another way. And at the same time, it reveals the value of the book. Because today, vis-à-vis the past, we have everything at our disposal. That is, we have the DVDs of all films on YouTube. We have a version of each. We could think that there is no need any longer of a book that talks about the films individually. Instead, it's not so. We really need it. And this reading, this interpretation frees the films and attributes them a new value, and it allows us to look at them in a new way with a different weight. So I believe this is a fundamental reading. Maybe Chaplin 2.0, it's a further step vis-à-vis the books that are already existing on Chaplin. But today, in 2013, Peter, having at his disposal all the films, all the writings, all the documents, all his culture, and his itinerary, both at human level as well as a scholar, managed to realize this book that maybe 20 or 30 years beforehand he couldn't have managed to do. I don't know if there are here I see Megan Marias who knew Peter before ourselves, or other friends who has already browsed or read the book and wants to add something, some comments. Into a microphone, please. Otherwise we can't translate, sorry. We cannot read. We cannot translate. The problem with Peter, exception made for the ones he would write in English, and many times I translated into he wanted me to do the translation into Spanish because he thought I would understand his way of writing. And you said it, and to make indirect allusions to other things. There is the mechanism of memory that we have about cinema, that is seeing the same film when we are 5 years of age, 15, 30, 40 years, up to the end. So I understand very well what you said. And truly, we miss Peter. Miguel, I remember precisely that he said you and Paola were the only ones who were able to translate him. And for Peter, well, he cared a lot for a version in a language that could be Italian, French, or whatever. A language that could be read by many people vis-a-vis the Finnish. And in particular of this book, he cared a lot because he had given this to us for us to translate it. So we hope that there are going to be other translations of this book that we believe is a very important book to know Chaplin, but also to know the extraordinary contribution of Peter von Bagh to the cinematographic critic and the understanding of the history of cinema. Well, I thank you very much. I thank Cecilia, I thank Paola, I thank Anna, and thanks to you all who have come here, and let's hope we can convene again with another translation of the many books in Finnish of Peter von Bagh. Thank you very much.
Sì, l'ho pensato.